We wanted to upload a trimmed-down version of a speech by an angry British Socialist Member of Parliament, as part of the Black History Month indulgence. It is instructional to eavesdrop on her echo chamber and hear her speaking out loud, her deranged belief system. We have then added a speech that we hope will be shared widely as this government minister's replies a breath of fresh air. Finally, we have added a clip of things yet to come.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. At the moment, history is taught to make one group of people feel inferior and another group of people feel superior. And this has to stop. We need to look at history and we need to improve it.
Lady for giving way. Could you just expand on which parts of the curriculum she believes make black children feel inferior?
So, history needs to be decolonised. My honourable friend from Earth and Thamesmead has already discussed how you can go through your whole of the GCSE and not have reference to any black authors at all. You can go through history thinking that, you know, the people that were enslaved were not a part of the uprising. You could go through history and not understand the richness of Africa and the Caribbean. You can go through history and not understand all the leaders in the black community. I mean, I'm surprised that the minister's actually asked me that, because it's so well documented that history needs to be decolonised. If you look at everything from the Runnymede Trust, if you look at all these organisations, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But absolutely, the minister, I'll give way.
I will address the issues around decolonising the curriculum at the end of my speech, but she will acknowledge that even though there may not be enough black authors, there are other racial groups such as Chinese, Asian and so on, who we don't believe are inferior. So if it's just the number of people who look like you, who've written books, who's making you inferior, why are black children different from all those other racial groups?
Well, there's no other group where they've been systematically stripped of their humanity throughout history, where colonisation has meant that they've gone to their country and encaptured them and taken them by force to another country, where they have been raped, where they've been thrown overboard in the sea. There's no other group that has happened to. And I'm also going to explain in my speech why it is so important that history is taught in its fullness. If the minister takes time to listen, I think I might just teach her a little something.
The Honourable Lady mentioned that no other group in history has been singled out and dehumanised in the way that she's outlined. And yes, without question, such activities are repugnant to all of us. However, we shouldn't exceptionalise either Africans or people from African descent. You will find slavery, and sadly, has been endemic in virtually all societies. As recently as the 19th century, with the Barbary pirates from North Africa, had enslaved over 1,300 Cornish men and women and subjugated them to historical, to slavery. So these are things, you'll find it in China, in the Indian subcontinent, in the Americas. So it's South America and with the Aztecs and Incas and so on. It's a beastly, ghastly thing which we must categorically condemn for all people. Would you not agree that there is no exclusive nature, as you're suggesting?
I pause, Mr. Deputy Speaker, because whenever there's a discussion about black history and an enslavement that lasted for decades, that was built on the economy, which is very different from any other type of enslavement. There's always this comparison where people try to compare one form of slavery to another. Sometimes, especially during Black History Month, it would be progress if one could just acknowledge the inhumanity that happened. If they could acknowledge the systemic racism that not only existed then, but has a lasting legacy now in our structures, which doesn't for any other group. This is why the teaching of history is so important, in its complete form, not with these rose-tinted glasses that says that white is supreme to any other group, but The person who tried to kill the Mayor of London and the member for Islington North had a perverted view of history and white supremacy. This is why it is important that history is taught in a balanced way. This is why it's important that you don't ignore the reality of what's happening just to make a political point. This is why the teaching of a decolonised history and inclusion of Black history is so important. And it doesn't mean that if you've been accused of racism or you have been racist, that you need to stay a racist for your whole entire life. You can change. You can educate yourself. It means you can change. Race is a social construct. It was created exactly so that they can dehumanize a group of people because of the color of their skin. That's why race was created. But racism is very real and very dangerous. Having a Black friend does not excuse your racism. In fact, this isn't Monopoly. Having a Black friend is not your get out of racist jail free card. Having a Black friend and being a racist just means that you need to do better. You need to do better. You need to do better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be standing here at the dispatch box to close this much-needed debate on Black History Month, and I'd like to congratulate the member for Erith and Thamesmead, who's managed to be both a frontbencher and a backbencher today. It's quite a feat. And also the Backbench Business Committee for granting this debate and giving me an opportunity to speak on an issue that's very close to my heart. And also thank you to all those honourable and right honourable members who have made thoughtful contributions. I will speak as quickly as I can, and I'm afraid I won't be able to reference every speech, but I think that this has been a fantastic debate. This year, more than it has been for decades, race has been at the heart of our national conversation. Black History Month remains an opportunity to shine a light upon those whose contributions to our national history deserves to be better known. This month, the government has taken the opportunity to celebrate the contribution of Black Britons who enrich our collective national life and form an inseparable part of our national history. Women like Yvonne Connolly, who in 1969 became the UK's first Black female head teacher. Throughout her 40-year career, she has inspired and mentored generations of educators. Mr. Speaker, the work of Ms. Connolly and her fellow heads is key in the topic we are debating. Education is the key to our mission as a government to level up and spread opportunity to everyone, whatever their background. Many members have said they want more Black history taught, but they don't seem to be aware of what is actually on the curriculum. Our curriculum is not the curriculum of 50, 40, or even 20 years ago. Children today are able to learn about the British Empire and colonialism, about the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition, and of how our history has been shaped by people of all ethnicities, as well as having the opportunity to study non-European cultures such as Mughal India or the Benin Empire, which is where my ancestors decided to have their own opportunity to take over the world in their own way. Pupils can currently study migration empires and the people in the AQA History GCSE, for example. The member for Ilford North is quite wrong to say that that's the only place that it can be learned. There are many other exam bodies that do offer this. But our curriculum does not need decolonising for the simple reason that it is not colonised. We should not apologise for the fact that British children primarily study the history of these islands. And it goes without saying that the recent fad to decolonise maths, decolonise engineering, decolonise the sciences that we have seen across our universities to make race the defining principle of what is studied is not just misguided, but actively opposed to the fundamental purpose of education. The curriculum, by its very nature, is limited. There are a finite number of hours to teach any subject, and what we haven't heard in this debate from those members who want more added to it on both sides of the House is what necessarily must be taken out. Perhaps we'll get to that on another day. Members such as the member for Islington North and many others have raised the Black Lives Matter movement. The member for Streatham raised the education guidance and believes that we're trying to stop children from becoming activists. I believe another member, apologies, I've forgotten who it was who mentioned it. However, what we are against is the teaching of contested political ideas as if they are accepted fact. We don't do this with communism, we don't do this with socialism, we don't do it with capitalism. And I want to speak about a dangerous trend in race relations that has come far too close to home to my life, and it is the promotion of critical race theory, an ideology that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression. I want to be absolutely clear, this government stands unequivocally against critical race theory. Some schools have decided to openly support the anti-capitalist Black Lives Matter group, often fully aware that they have a statutory duty to be politically impartial. Black lives do matter, of course they do, but we know that the Black Lives Matter movement, capital BLM, is political. I know this because at the height of the protest, I saw white Black Lives, I've been told of white Black Lives Matter protesters calling, and I'm afraid I apologize for saying this word, calling a black armed police officer guarding Downing Street a pet nigger. That is why we do not endorse that movement on this side of the House. It is a political movement, and what would be nice would be for members on the opposite side to condemn many of the actions that we see this political movement instead of pretending that it is a completely wholesome anti-racist organization. There is a lot of pernicious stuff that is being pushed, and we stand against that. We do not want to see teachers teaching their white pupils about white privilege and inherited racial guilt. And let me be clear, any school which teaches these elements of critical race theory as fact, or which promotes partisan political views such as defunding the police without offering a balanced treatment of opposing views, is breaking the law. Members have mentioned the police. Our history is our own, it's not America's. Too often, those who campaign against racial inequality import wholesale a narrative and assumptions that have nothing to do with this country's history and have no place on these islands. Our police force is not their police force. Since its establishment by Robert Peel, our police have operated on the principle of policing by consent, and it gives me tremendous pride to still, in 2020, live in a nation where the vast majority of our police officers are unharmed. On the history of black people in Britain, again, our history of race is not America's history of race. Most black British people who have come to our shores were not brought here in chains, but came voluntarily, due to their connections to the UK and in search of a better life. I should know I am one of them. And we have our own joys and sorrows to tell. From the Windrush generation to the Somali diaspora, it is a story that is uniquely ours. And if we forget that story, to replace it with an imported, Americanized narrative of slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow, we erase not only the history of Black Britain, but the history of every other community that has contributed to the society and has also been a victim of racism or discrimination, from the Pakistani community to the Jewish community. On delivering a race equality strategy, I've listened to members opposite talk about a race equality strategy. They know that this government has set up a commission on race and ethnic disparities, but they have not engaged with it. They don't want a race equality strategy. What they want is for the government to adopt their race equality strategy, and that's not what we're doing. Mr. Speaker, we won an election just a year ago. I'm afraid I don't have enough time to give way. Mr. Speaker, we won an election a year ago. If members on the other side want to implement their race equality strategy, they should go ahead and win an election, win the support of the British people, and then they can have their way. But at the moment, this is a Conservative government, and we are going to do this in the way that we believe the people of this country want. I'm afraid I'm not giving way. I've only got 3 minutes, and I have more than 3 minutes of context, of content. Mr. Speaker, in her speech, the member for Brent Central says she hoped I'd learn something from her. Now it's time for me to give her a couple of lessons too, although I don't believe she's in her place. She said in her speech, we need to look at history and we need to improve it. Lesson number 1, you cannot improve history, you can only learn from it. What we can improve is the future, and that is what this government has been doing over the last 10 years. I won't reel out statistics in the interest of time. Other members on this side of the House have already done so. Lesson number 2. Black history is not the history of institutional racism. Listening to some members across the House, it's quite clear that they don't know the difference. It is not true, as the member for Liverpool Riverside said, that African history was interrupted by slavery. Also shows an ignorance of geography, because West African history is different from African history. As probably the only member of this House who actually grew up and went to school in Africa, I can tell you that's not what we're taught. Much more is taught about the history of black slave traders who existed before and after the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the most notable statue in the city of Lagos, where I grew up, is that of Madam Tinubu. It's the biggest one. It's now equivalent to Trafalgar Square. She was a slave trader, but she was also a freedom fighter and a much-loved icon. Her slave trading is not celebrated, but her fight against colonizers is. In Nigeria, she's recognized as a complex character, as all historical figures are, and heaven help anyone who would try to pull her statue down. There is much that we can learn from Nigeria about how to handle the issue of statues. But why does this issue mean so much to me, Mr. Speaker? It's not just because I'm a first-generation immigrant. It's because my daughter came home from school this month and said to me, we're learning Black History Month because every other month is about white history. This is wrong, and this is not what our children should be picking up. These are not the values I have taught her. They are instead yet another sign of the pernicious identity politics that looks at individuals primarily as groups of biological characteristics. People often don't realize when it has taken hold, and I know that many of them are well-meaning. But what I really want to finish with is the story of Tom Molyneux. He was a black boxer who freed himself from slavery in the US, and he moved to England in 1809. I would have said so much more, but I'm out of time, Mr. Speaker. But what his story tells us is that this is a country that welcomes people, and that black people from all over the world have found this to be a great and welcoming country. These are the values as a black woman I'm teaching my black daughter. We must never take it for granted. And this Black History Month, let us celebrate the black talent we are blessed with, the progress we have made in accepting one another, and the contribution black people have made in making us who we are as a nation. Thank you.
Well, I also want to talk about, this whole definition of race. It seems to be so narrow and specific. Only the certain people actually have a seat at the table to talk about this issue. And specifically, let's focus on something that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley talked about last year at the Netroots Nation convention in Philadelphia. Take a listen.
If you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice.
What does that even mean, Mr. Johnson?
Well, it means that they've been led, and she knows, and personally, I respect the job she does, but I respectfully disagree with her. That's what liberals have done. Liberals have set up that same format where you have the House Negroes and the field Negroes. And the liberals have gotten to her and many others for her to say that some blacks can come and others can't. What is that saying? What is that sending the message? Are she representing all blacks? There are blacks in her district who feel totally different from her. But again, many African Americans have been hijacked, including congresspersons who've been hijacked by liberals for years, and they're in that mindset. You would think that she would want all of us at the table. So that means if I live in her district and I dissented or had a different point of view, that I'm not invited to be at the table. Well, then let's create another table for all of us who think like I think, and then let us come up with an agenda, and then let us either merge those agendas or we put forth both agendas. That's a compromise.
Yeah, let the American people choose which is the best one. Now, of course,
Sure.
I stated